Hello and welcome to the new episode of the podcast. And today I am really excited to have Jeff Agostinelli as my guest. And Jeff is a life and business strategist who helps creative entrepreneurs and solopreneurs stop wasting time in their business, build their confidence, and get a handle on their emotions. That all sounds really interesting, and I feel like I might need to hire Jeff after this call as my own life coach. But I am really excited to welcome him to the podcast.
Welcome to You Can Exhale Now, a mindful living podcast for the modern pace, hosted by Lesia Liu. This podcast is for anyone who wants to get more out of life without the burnout. Because when you learn to take proper care of yourself, you have more energy, a more positive outlook, and more gratitude for life. And because you cannot reach your goals if you're tired, overwhelmed, judgmental, angry, and feel sorry for yourself. Each episode, you will learn actionable strategies for self-care, mental health, productivity, better life-work balance, and happiness from coaches, therapists, and experts. Stop holding your breath. You can exhale now. Choose to be a more authentic version of yourself than you've been in a while.
So, Jeff, welcome and take it away. Introduce yourself and tell us more about you.
Yeah, thank you, Lesia. Thanks for having me on the show today. It's really great to be here. So yeah, just a little bit about me. It was an interesting path, I guess you could say, to find what I do now from where I started. My original intent, if you will, professionally was to go to medical school. So I really wanted to help people in that way. But one thing led to another, and I got into macrobiotics and raw food and just a lot of different, you could just group them into more natural ways of eating, all plant-based. And after doing that for a while and being a live-in private chef, I really started to see how people conducted their lives and really what contributed to health and wellness in addition to food, right? In addition to what we eat, like lifestyle and thoughts and feelings and emotions, and really how we conduct other areas of our lives. And that led me into personal development. And then what I think a lot of people, what happens to a lot of coaches, life coaches, or anybody who works in anything other than business to business services is we acquire a skill that helps somebody in life. And then we look back down the road and we go, how the heck do I market this stuff? So essentially, I learned how to market all my services as a life coach, and then helping people overcome anxiety and overwhelm, and just really weaved it all together after a while, and started to help people across the board. Because what I've seen over the years is that nothing is isolated, right? Everything's in context. So if people have challenges in their relationships, or if they have challenges with their kids and their parenting, even in athletics, that can bleed over into business and other areas of life. And to really be able to look at things holistically and to address the underlying root cause of the problem, it's a lot easier to really be able to get a handle on our life and our business if we can look at it in a unique way.
That sounds great, Jeff. And I have to agree with you on the holistic approach. In my own journey with anxiety and self-care, I found that it is definitely better to approach a problem at hand from a few different angles. And like you said, it's never really just one area that is affected, right? If we are
Mm-hmm.
talking about nutrition, it plays such an important role in our physical health and also mental health, and just everything. It affects everything. And I agree with you in terms of how one part of life, if you're struggling in one part of your life, it definitely bleeds into different. It would be ignorant really to say that we can keep work at work and family in family. Like, it would be a perfect life, right, if we could keep our asshole boss at work. But unfortunately, a lot of times, as a human beings, we are really incapable of doing that, because the stress and overwhelm affects other parts of life. So I
Mm-hmm.
definitely have to agree with you there. So tell me more about overwhelm. It is such a big part of our modern life. I would probably not be exaggerating if I said that 99% of people are overwhelmed in their life, whether it's business, building their own business, or growing their career, and then family and friends. I feel like we have so much on our plates these days, and technology, while it should help us and to increase our productivity and keep us organized, really, I think it's one of the factors in our modern lives that definitely contributes more to the overall overwhelm we are all experience. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think to look at it, yes, and right, like it's never, there are people like in the when it comes to guns, right? A lot of people say that like guns are bad, right? But it's not like a gun pulls the trigger itself, right? Like a person does that. So it's not that guns are bad; it's that people use things in bad ways. And it's the same thing really with digital or social media or anything having to do with electronics. Is that most people have a strange relationship with their devices, right? Like if you set a parameter for yourself for a day and say, I'm only going to pick up my phone at, let's say, 10 a.m., noon, and 2, right? You just give yourself 3 times during the day. Chances are if you're used to picking up your phone like most Americans, like most people anywhere really, most people pick up their phone 100 plus times a day. I can't remember the exact statistics at the moment, but it's an absurd
It's
number of
something like
times.
that, yes.
Yeah, it's like 140 something times a day is the average. So to only pick up your phone 3 times a day, you literally have to resist an urge 130 something times. I mean, think about that for a minute. So it's every time you have the impulse, which is a neurological signal that says pick up your phone. You have to resist that temptation every single time. So the first things first is like, can we consolidate activities? It's like, do we really need to pick up a phone that many times a day? And the answer is absolutely no. And really reestablishing our relationship with technology um, is important. I remember, I can't remember where I read this, but it was really fun. It was on Instagram somewhere. It was something to the effect of, imagine if you went out to check your mailbox as many times as you check your email. Like how absurd that would look.
Yes.
To walk outside 20, 30 times a day for some people to check your mailbox and see if anything's there. Like it
Yep.
just, when we put things in context, it really begs the question of why do we do these things? And a lot of times the root, what I found through a lot of my own personal work and business and my personal life and with clients and their business and in their personal lives, is a lot of it comes down to protecting pain and protecting insecurities. A lot of time when we feel uncomfortable or we don't know what to do, instead of taking a quiet moment to really sit with how we're feeling and really understand what a intelligent next step is, we pick up our phone, we jump on Instagram, we go on Facebook, we check our email. And a lot of people make the rounds, as I call it, right? They'll open Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, email, they'll put their phone down, and then 10 minutes later they do the same thing, and then
Yes.
20 minutes later they do the same thing. And it's really crazy when you think about it, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and then you spend 20 minutes on Instagram, and then you go to Facebook, and you just keep
Yeah.
bouncing back and forth. It's like vicious cycle. Absolutely. And you touched on a really interesting point about sitting with yourself. I think, and it's my personal experience too, it is sometimes really difficult to just sit quietly with yourself, and it's almost like a skill, a muscle that we need to train all the time. And because of all these distractions and social media and this like instant gratification, I think a lot of people are struggling with just the idea of sitting there quietly, not only to face our own like fears and insecurities, but I also think it comes from being entertained all the time and just being
Mhm.
afraid to be bored there that, like for 5-10 minutes. And again, in my personal experience, I found that when I'm really bored for 5 or 10 minutes, I come up with this creative ideas or solutions. I've heard something about, when you are bored, your brain starts to think of like creative solutions and makes all these creative connections between ideas that seem not really relevant to each other. Um, why do you think it is? Is that boredom, or is this kind of fear and insecurity? Because to be honest, when you go on Instagram, I think that's another hit to all of our confidence. When you look at the, perfect life of another blogger or highlight reel of somebody else's life, wouldn't that make us more insecure than we already are?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Leslie. I think that where do I start? Well, first to start with the like logging on to any of these things, we tend to find what we look for, even if we don't know that we're looking for it. So if we're jumping onto social media because we're bored and we already are insecure in our image, we'll find things that prove that and typically pile on top of it. So it's no coincidence that we're feeling unsure or insecure, or we're having a lull in time in space, and we want to fill that. But when we go to fill it, we tend to fill it with more of what we are, right? We'll fill it with more insecurity, more
Absolutely.
self-judgment, more like I'm not there yet, or wow, look at their life. But it's really important, and you said it perfectly, is to keep it in context of like it is the highlight reel. Like no one, I mean, I do my best, and I shared something the other day, like to share vulnerably at times. It's like none of our lives are perfect, right? Even
Yep.
though it's portrayed that way, it's like we all have insecurities, we all have things we're working through, and I feel on one part like it's my responsibility to really share those things and how I work through them, so that people can see like, oh wow, he's not perfect, she's not perfect. It's not this, look at me, I'm perfect. It's wow, here I'm a human. I'm humaning. I'm doing this thing called being a human being, and I'm traversing this experience as well. But as far as like conditioning anything, right? It's like the only reason we pick up our phones a million times a day is because we've done that consistently. So there's a way to really train other ways of being, right? So it's like if you condition yourself to not pick up your phone, or only pick it up at certain times, or to, when you finish a task, to make sure that, say you write every day for 30 minutes, right? Every day when you're done writing for 30 minutes, to pattern the behavior of, okay, when I'm done writing for 30 minutes, I am going to go sit in the chair in the corner of my room. I'm going to set my timer on my phone for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm just going to watch my thoughts. Like training stillness is the same as training filling time in any other way. It's just that we're not practiced in it. And I know for me personally, it's like I've come to value those moments because it's a time when I can really just dive into the recesses of my mind and in my being and really find out what's in there, and see what actually comes out, instead of tuning into the external world and letting my next steps be informed by judgment or insecurity, or what the next door neighbor's doing, or what the guy on Instagram is doing, and really be able to initiate my own conversation with God, source, greater intelligence, infinite intelligence, whatever you'd like to call it, and have that communication pathway very active all day, every day. And then the last thing I want to add in there too is that instead of just patterning stillness, something that a lot of people don't realize is that they tend to feed their fears all day long. So in those moments, they're not being bored. They're not just on Instagram, but they're perpetuating like, oh, well, I got to do this. And if I don't, then this is going to happen and this bad thing's going to happen. And they have these runaway thoughts. And one of the better things to train is to really understand that like what you move towards is what you feed it visually, energetically, emotionally. And to be able to tap into your dream, your goals, your vision for your life many, many, many times a day, not just in your morning routine, but setting up checkpoints throughout the day. For me, it's like 3 points distinctly between, the morning check-in and the before bed check-in, of really sitting down and visualizing and building out the picture of my life, like what I want to experience in different areas of life, because that also fuels me too. So instead of, being fueled by the highlight reel and whatever else comes along with it, really tapping into like what I want, and what really is going to fuel me to take the next steps, and to move forward in my day with confidence and with vigor, and not to just kind of like, sit back and wait for shit to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it also takes a lot of self-awareness to start doing that. Like you said, I think we are conditioned and programmed to check our phone hundreds of times to see how many likes we've got, how many emails we've received, what we need to do. And it really takes a lot of mindfulness and like mindful practice to go and check in with yourself throughout the day. And because of the lack of this like checking in with ourselves, I think that's where a lot of anxiety issues, depression issues come in, because we are doing so many things throughout the day, but how many of those things are really aligned with our values, our goals, our feelings, and stuff like that. So what are your first steps for anyone who does not have a check-in practice, who does not have like a mindfulness practice, but feels like there's probably something there to explore? Where do these people, would you suggest, get started with something like this?
So first of all, Alessia, I want to commend you because you just named the three things, right? I start people in this place. The goals and values are the first two things, right?
Yep.
And everything is guided by feelings. So like the first place I start with people, and this is part of my signature coaching program, is like getting very clear on goals, values, and then conditioning feeling and understanding our already conditioned response to circumstances. So a lot of people have a very strange relationship with goals because they've set goals and haven't achieved them. But one of the really cool things about goals is that they're not really, yes, they're meant to be achieved, but they're really meant to inspire us. So if goals are set the right way, they lift us to become somebody who gets to achieve those goals. But the way that people tend to use goals is they use them as another metric by which to judge themselves. So instead of, let's say someone sets a goal to do 10K months, right? Let's say a coach is like, I want to make $10,000 a month coaching. And the first month they set that goal, they make 5,000. Now they can look at that and say, oh shit, I didn't hit my goal. And like, man, I'm bad and this and that. And, riddle themselves with judgment. Or they can look at it and say, wow, okay, cool. I'm halfway there. What needs to change for me to hit that mark next month? And they can look at it as information and start to move the pieces around. And it may be that the goal was too small. It may be that the approach was incorrect. So using goals as a way to inspire action, not as a way to judge ourselves. That's
Yeah,
one
I
huge
am
starting point.
guilty as charged with setting goals and then beating myself up for not achieving those goals. So that's something that I'm definitely working with in my life right now at this point. And one thing I found really useful is that, yeah, like while you're setting goals, you have to be gentle with yourself and you have to use it in the context of how far did I come. Maybe the goal was too big, or like you said, too small. And a lot of people tend to get overwhelmed with goals because I feel like they're looking at this one big giant goal and
Mm-hmm.
they fail to recognize the small steps they need to take, because when it's broken down into smaller steps, then it seems much more achievable and not so overwhelming, right? And then you feel like, okay, I can start making the progress. But a lot of people tend to set ginormous goals like I did, and then we get overwhelmed and then we start procrastinating because there's a fear of like, whoa, I cannot do this and I cannot achieve it. And I'm sure you probably see a lot of that with your own clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the analogies I love to use with that is running, right? Because it's like I do ultra marathon, so it's anything longer than a marathon. And setting bigger goals and not really training properly, or not really having the right plan, or not giving yourself enough time is basically the equivalent of going from never running a day in your life to going and trying to run like a 50K the next day.
Yep.
It
Yes.
just doesn't make sense. Like you haven't trained for it. And if you go and try to run, probably by like the second mile, your body's going to be breaking down because you've never done it before. So it's really the same conversation of realizing like have I put in the time to really do this so that I can sustain this amount of effort for this amount of time? And realizing where the sweet spot is with goals. Now, the second part, though, with values is that a lot of people are setting goals to attain things that they don't really want because they think that they're going to feel a certain way when they finally get that goal.
Yeah, happiness based on some type of achievement. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So with values, it's easy to be able to move towards a goal because if you know that you have a value of, say, I have a 9-year-old daughter, right? So one of my high values is spending a lot of time with my daughter. So I know that for me personally, traveling 3 weeks out of a month is not going to be a business model that's going to work for me. So if I set up my business in a way that has me on the road for 3 weeks out of the month in order to reach a goal, that's not going to work, right? So that's a simple example, but like really understanding what your values are is going to either fuel or flounder your progress towards your goal. Because if you're going against your values, you're never going to get to the goal because you're exercising something against who you are and what you think is important. So the values part is really, really important. And I published a podcast episode about this. We can link it up. I'll send you the link. And it's an exercise that takes people through how to discover their values by looking back at peak experiences in their life or times where they had these like intense emotions. Because we also remember events where we had high emotion, where it was really exciting, or where it was, like you experienced high levels of gratitude or love or appreciation. That tends to embed in the nervous system more, and we just remember those events viscerally and visually and in all ways. So really understanding how to navigate towards your goals with your values is hugely important. And then the last piece of that, which it's funny that you mentioned all three of these, I really love that, but understanding the feeling conversation, because everything comes down to a feeling. At the end of the day, we don't do things logically. We emotionally decide and then we justify with logic. It's really important to understand that because most people are trying to do it the opposite way.
Yeah.
Even in personal development, they're trying to think their way to feeling good.
Yes.
Which is really just ass backwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's an aspect of emotion that is based in cognition, but it's not, you don't think your way into feeling good solely. So really understanding how to, one, expand your emotional capacity. One way to do that is by expanding your emotional vocabulary and starting to realize how to express, identify, and really get comfortable with experiencing the full spectrum of emotion. Right. So that means basically not pushing away what you would consider negative emotions like sadness or grief or anger or frustration, but being able to sit with them long enough so that they can move through the body. Right.
I love that. I absolutely love it. It's a big part of, I'm sure you know, somatic experiencing.
Absolutely.
You just let your body and your mind process through these feelings, and sometimes really painful feelings, which a lot of people, it's really difficult, and it seems counterintuitive to feel better. In order to feel better, you need to go through these unpleasant feelings and sensations in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you more about feelings, and it's kind of two parts. First of all, in relationships, in relations to goals and goal settings, it seems like a lot of people fall into the trap of feelings, right? Oh, I am not feeling inspired today, or I'm feeling fear, so I will procrastinate, or I feel angry that somebody did not understand my next genius business idea or something like that. So I think a lot of people tend to become prisoners of their own feelings and let the feelings, while it's really important to acknowledge those feelings, how do you not let your success to be determined by your feelings and how you feel that day? And the other part of the question is then, how do we try to have more of the right, quote unquote, right feelings, positive feelings that help us move towards our goals?
Yeah, great question. So with the philosophy, I guess you can say, or the practice that I employ, and one that I use with my clients, is basically like crowding out what people would consider negative emotion. I personally don't buy into negative and positive emotion, but it's the easiest way to describe it so that people can understand it. So emotion exists on a continuum. And there's been plenty of people scientifically proven that show that emotion carries a frequency. And David Hawkins really outlined this really, really well in Power versus Force and in Letting Go. This scale of emotion and scale of human consciousness, and how things like apathy, grief, fear, anger, all of those things exist at a lower vibratory rate or a lower frequency. And if you look at the emotions like acceptance, all the way up to gratitude, love, and appreciation, excitement, all of those things, they carry a higher frequency, right? Now, one of the ways that I've used, and one of the ways that I help a lot of people use this, is to crowd out the negative emotions or the lower frequency emotions by consciously conditioning or experiencing positive emotions. So, when it comes to self care specifically, I'll speak to it in that context, is because a lot of people look at self care as kind of like turning off, right? Like, I'm good, I've worked, I've done everything, I'm done, I don't want to do it anymore. Right. So they just like chill out. They consider it more of a passive experience. But I don't
And
really
then
buy into that. What's that?
and then after that too, like once I'm done with everything,
Yeah.
then I take care of myself.
No, no, no. The way to really do it, and the way that I found to be super, super effective, is to have goals that are not based on performance, right? So for some people that may be an athletic pursuit, for some people that may be like a relationship goal, a traveling goal, whatever it is, but it's something that really gets you excited. It invokes those higher level emotions where you're experiencing bliss, excitement, appreciation, love, gratitude, all of those things on a regular basis. So for instance, self-care for me personally, and this isn't everybody, but for me is running. Like, I love running. I live in North Carolina. The trails out here are absolutely amazing. And I spend anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a week on a trail running. So 50, 60 miles a week, running out in nature,
Wow,
training for
that's
a
impressive.
50K race, right? For like a 31-mile race. And for me, I'm not doing it to compete. I'm doing it because when I'm out there and using my body in that way, I feel like I'm in a natural rhythm, and I literally feel like I'm communing with God on my whole run.
I can completely relate to that experience. While I do not run, I do hike a lot, and yeah,
Yeah.
the experience of nature is just really profound. And I think that's another thing that modern society kind of threw to the curb. We ignore the fact that we are part of the nature, that we are not really part of technology world. We are
Yeah.
really natural beings. Absolutely, yeah. So I can completely agree to and relate to your experience.
Yeah. So, like, for me, that's self care. And for me, that really invokes a lot of those positive emotions. So, having enough of those experiences really starts to, I'll say, lessen the impact of the negative experiences, because really, like anger, frustration, all of those things, and this may sound counter to what I said previously, but it's not. So, just hear it this way, is that when we experience negative emotion, it tends to drive thought. So there's more experiences, the more signals that go from the body to the brain than go from the brain to the body. So when we're feeling tension or anger or frustration in our body, the impulse goes to the brain. And typically what happens is we have thoughts. So let's say that we presented a business idea and it was our passion and it got shot down. And we have these thoughts of resentment and anger and frustration. Those things can just basically like churn around, and those thoughts will produce more negative emotions, and then the emotion happens, and then more negative thoughts happen as a result. So it becomes this negative feedback cycle.
Mhm.
Now, one of the ways to really process that is to go, and like I said, some people can process this through dancing, through hiking, through running, whatever it is, but to be able to have something where you aren't thinking about it per se, but you're immersing yourself in an experience where you're invoking those higher vibration emotions and you're feeling good. And it literally colors the experience that you had previously in a different light. So you see it a different way. it lessens the impact.
Mhm.
It will also give you that kind of like extra push that you may need to go and pitch the idea to somebody else, to take it back to the drawing board. And maybe where before you were taking it personally, you were making it about you, like, oh, well, my idea sucks and this, that, and the other. You use it as information and say, okay, well, maybe he was right about this one thing. And what if I take it back to the drawing board and look at it this way? And what may happen is you come out with a whole new iteration that's completely next level, and you go back and pitch it and it gets taken by the next person. So it's really more of a looking at life as feedback. And instead of taking things personally, being able to evolve and also really know when to assert yourself, um, when to take things back into the think tank, so to speak, and to rework ideas, and how to navigate.
Absolutely. So just to clarify, you named a couple of experiences like dancing, hiking, or running.
Hmm.
Would you suggest that a physical part of any activity, being physically active, is an important part of this positive?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, some people may be able to engineer that with with drawing or painting or something that is creative in that aspect. But I find that the because even if you look at trauma, right, the study of trauma is that the body keeps the score, right? So the body
Yeah.
stores trauma. And I believe that when we can move the body and when we can really just get into the fascia and just explore what happens, and then also use the body in the way it was intended to be used, right? Like the restore natural movement. I think it just irons out those kinks naturally. I mean, if you look at nature, after an adrenalizing experience, right? After a fight or flight, survival type experience, animals and natures will unwind, right? They will literally, you'll see them like twitch and like do these weird movements, and they're shaking out that experience. Like we
Mhm.
don't do that as people, right? Like most people, after a traumatizing experience, go on lockdown.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And there's even a saying like shake it off.
exactly.
Yeah. And yet we shut down. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I wanted to ask you and move our conversation a little bit about confidence. I know that's another
Hmm.
part that you help your clients with is confidence. And that's a great example that you said that, for example, you feel really passionate about the idea and then you get shut down, and that usually takes a huge toll on our confidence and moving forward with our goals and values, and we tend to have a lot of negative feelings after that. So tell me more about how we can build confidence and go from this negative experiences without really losing our passion or our drive or taking it too personally.
Yeah, great question. So, confidence is a funny thing. A lot of people think that they need confidence in order to do something, but
Yep.
confidence is more of a result than it is a precursor. So, confidence is something that you gain by an experience. Like when you go and let's say you do videos, right? Like the first time you do a video, and say maybe you're doing Facebook Lives. Let's use that as an example. The first time you do a Facebook Live, if you've never done them before and you've never been on camera, chances are it's going to be awkward. It's going to be clunky. You're going to be like, what do I say? I have no idea what to do.
Yep.
But if you do 20 or 30 of those, you're going to get better. And
Absolutely.
then if you do 20 or 30 more, you're going to be even better. You're going to get more confident as you go along. But the interesting thing about confidence is that most people want to be confident in something that they have zero confidence in, but they expect it to happen overnight.
Yeah, yeah. And I think absolutely. And I think it's funny that you mention it because it seems really not intuitive, but really how can you have confidence around something if you do not have competence in that
Hmm.
field
Yeah.
or that niche or activity? And yet we all sit and wait until something happens that makes us confident.
Yeah, I think it kind of got muddled up like somewhere along the way, because if you look at like traditional psychology actually teaches the confidence competence loop, right? It's a feedback loop that like as you gain more competence, you naturally get more confident. Like, that's a thing. And somewhere along the way people were like, well, I'm just not confident, I can't do it. It's like, well, that's why you're right. Yeah, you can't. So go do it and you'll get more confident. So it's just, I feel like it's a backwards conversation, meaning like people think they need it in order to do something, but it's the result. But the other thing too is that like I think with a lot of things, people are trying to protect their insecurities. So yes, they may feel or think that they're not confident, but what they're really saying is, I don't want to look stupid. Or what they're really saying is, I don't want to be embarrassed. Or what they're really saying is like, I just don't want to be wrong. And what that's also leveraged on is the fact that like they said something quote unquote stupid in the past and got laughed at, or they were made fun of, or they were belittled or bullied, and their body is still holding on to that. So really the only way to start to unwind experiences is to literally go and seek them out. And one of the things I work with my clients on too is if they come to an experience where they feel they need more confidence, I employ them to say one thing: let's find out. So if they're like, well, I don't know how to do this, and what if? Let's find out. Well, like, what if this happens? Let's find out. So instead of trying to see what's going to happen if they go and make the video, or if they, reach out and do 10 sales calls and get rejected, let's find out. Let's find out what happens and get the actual data instead of thinking something bad's going to happen or thinking it's not going to work out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's an important like feedback loop, and that's another thing I've found myself working on recently is learning by doing,
Hmm.
because we can get so caught up in our own imaginary world and the worst case scenarios that we really fail even to try something and to take small steps in the right direction.
Hmm.
So how do you help your clients combat that fear of being laughed at or being misunderstood? Because, like you said, it's traumatic when we feel misunderstood or we feel stupid, and we do carry around that programming that we should not risk to be in that situation again. So how do we move past that?
It really comes down to training. It comes down to practicing in a safe container. I remember another great analogy. A lot of my analogies come from running because it's just the growth is growth no matter what way you
Yeah.
look at it. And I remember when I started, I made the decision like I'm going to be a runner. And I was there's a loop around where I live. It's called Beaver Lake, and it's partially trail, partially gravel. So it's a nice mixed terrain, and it's a little under 2 miles. It's 1.8 miles. And I used to do laps around it because you can park there. And if you do 2 laps, and a little over 2 laps, it's 4 miles. A little over 3 laps is 6 miles. And I remember when I started going from 4 miles to 5 miles to 6 miles and up, and I could practice in a safe container. So I knew that I could safely go beyond my limit. And if I needed to stop, I could stop. And the furthest that I have to walk back to the car would be like 8/10 of a mile, right? Nothing huge. And chances were most of the time, if I really needed to stop, I could go like an extra, 4/10 of a mile, and then I only have 4/10 left to go. It's the same thing with coaching, right? Like one of the main reasons why it's super helpful to work with a coach is because that recovery period, most people won't push themselves past their limits. They'll stop before. So when working with a coach, you can do the same thing. You can practice in a safe container and you can go and you can do the things. And then when you meet back with your coach again, or when you send in your assignments, or if you reach out via email or text or whatever the agreement is in that particular engagement, you could say, oh, here's what I did. Here's what happened. Here's how I'm feeling. Here's what's going on. And then the coach can give you really valuable feedback depending on the coach and maybe 10, 15 years of experience doing these particular exercises and say, oh, cool. Well, how about this and this and this and try this and do that and then go back out and do this and then let me know how that goes. And you can shorten that gap so much just by having someone gently encouraging you and also giving you that safe space to really be able to test your own limits and know that you've got someone in your corner that can give you really valuable feedback. Whereas if you're by yourself, sometimes you take that action and you're like, oh my God, my life is going to end. I just did this thing. And oh my God, what's going to happen? And you spin out, right? So it's like being able to go beyond your limits and do that in a way that is very almost like a relay race, right? Like passing the baton and being able to continually go beyond your limits. What typically happens, I know with especially my business clients, whenever we're doing one-to-one, they experience really rapid growth quickly. And a lot of it is just by doing the work that they've been afraid to do, eliminating a lot of the things that are taking up time unnecessarily, whether it's, additional side hustles or additional work, whatever it is, and paring down on the 1, 2, or 3 things that are actually creating results in their business and driving those things forward. And the typical result has been doubling their income most of the time, as far as looking at and assessing what's working, what's not working, and being able to go out and execute on the things that they were previously afraid to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We almost made like a full circle where we started talking about social media and having this highlight reel of somebody else's life, and this need to seem perfect all the time. Like we have perfect lives, our career is perfect, our family, relationships, health, everything absolutely perfect. And yet that's not really the case for anyone, but we are so afraid to speak up and
Mhm.
talk about all those things. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and just to give you kind of like an idea too, it's interesting. Like I know for me personally, like there's a lot of my work is it's in both realms, right? It's on like the tactical and strategic and time management, really getting diligent with blocking time, getting diligent with a lot of ways of how to manage your day, manage interruptions, distractions, making sure that you can really get your work done that you need to get done. But also weaving in the intuitive and the feeling and being able to express yourself vulnerably. And I know that for me personally, whenever I go out and extend myself and share things that are a little sometimes almost too personal for me, right? Like I don't want to share this, I don't want to like open myself up or be that vulnerable. Whenever I share those things in a post or in a video, the engagement is just off the charts and through the roof every single time without fail, literally like 10 times what they are on the more strategic and tactical posts.
Right. Which just indicates that people are looking for that relatable post.
Exactly.
We're all going through the same thing, and we all have the same experience, really, even
Mhm.
though the circumstances are different. The experience of human is really the same for everyone.
For sure.
Well, I absolutely love that. I think there's so many gems in this conversation, and I hope listeners will find a lot of things to think about and to implement in their own life. So I really appreciate your time and have to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this conversation.
Oh, you're welcome, Leslie. It was great being on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you've learned a lot of new strategies. Be sure to check out the notes below this episode for additional resources and tools mentioned in today's show. I would love to keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts and takeaways with me on social media channels wherever you are. And do not forget to tag me. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you, and I will see you on the next episode. If this podcast has helped you even a little bit, please leave a review and subscribe so that we can help spread the message together.